There we go. Now I can see a few more people. All right. So is it about time for us to get started?
You got 1 minute.
And Donna, when I'm sharing my screen, you're just seeing the slide, right? You aren't seeing what I have on the right, which is
Correct. No,
everyone there, the participants and things in the gallery view. Okay, good.
I'm just seeing your slides and you actually.
Mhm. Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure I wasn't blocking things over there.
All right, just so everyone knows what I'll do every week, what I'll do is send out a cumulative YouTube and any links that Erin sends to me. So every week you'll just get a cumulative review of everything that we've covered, every YouTube channel and every handout will go out every week because the registration has not closed. So we get some new members every week. So I'll just keep sending out repeats, and I'm sure that helps you out too, because if you're like me, I'm not really good about organizing. So, all right, it is now 6:01 and we're going to get started. This is week 2 of our Reading Reflex book study with Erin Duncan, who is the owner of the Phono-Graphix. Do you have Phono-Graphix company? Is that what it's called?
Phono-Graphix Reading Company. Yeah.
Okay, so take it away, Erin.
Great. Well, thank you again for all of you who are here and all of you watching later too. This is, as Donna said, week 2, and we were supposed to be covering chapter 3 and 4, but I changed things up a little bit. Okay. I decided that we would focus on chapter 3 today. Because there's just a lot of groundwork to cover there. And I think if we cover that well, then the other lessons come much easier. And so we will skip next week. And then the following week, we'll cover chapter 4, which has the adjacent consonant sounds that we were going to cover today. You'll see that one will go pretty quickly, and it'll be a nice review too after us being gone for 2 weeks. And then we'll delve into the chapter 5, teaching the advanced code. On February 22nd. And then the following week, we'll look at multisyllable management and maybe finishing up the advanced code if we need to. And then we have a week at the end to look at where we go from there and maybe demonstrate how this looks in a classroom, like tier 1 instruction and tier 2 instruction, or talk with parents about what they can be doing at home after they finish the reading reflex lessons to continue the reinforcement of what you've been teaching. So last time we looked at giving the pretest, and I demonstrated that with my daughter, Samantha. And I thought we would start at this before we launch into chapter 3, just looking back at the pretest. And I shared the test forms with you, and I put some notes on there as well so that we could look at those today. And you'll see the first test was the blending test. And my daughter was doing just fine, and I asked her at this point to make some errors for us all so you could see how I might record those. And the scoring of the tests is very easy. You just add up the correct number. And so her score, although it's not really an accurate score because of the errors I asked her to make, was 12 out of 15, which would be poor for someone her age or even someone younger. If this were her actual score, I would be concerned, and I would really be concentrating on teaching her blending. I know that was one of my main goals that I would need to accomplish. The next test I gave her was the phoneme segmentation test. And again, she wasn't making any errors, and I wanted you to see some. So I asked her to start making some here. And so for the word trip, for example, she said I. And so I wrote down that she got the first 2 sounds correct. I wrote something that would remind me of what she had said for the incorrect sound, and then that she got the p sound correct. So she got 3 points for trip. In hand, she skipped the n sound entirely for us. And so I indicated that, and that's a missing point as well. So her score totaled up to a 39 out of 42, her score. And again, that's not a good score, even though she didn't miss that many. If this were a real score, I would really want to firm up this skill for her. Let's see if there's anything else I want to tell you about segmenting. Yes, and also remember, on any of these, even if she scored very well, it doesn't mean there's not a problem. Just because she can segment doesn't mean she does segment. As she's working with print, she may not do it on her own. It may not occur to her to. She may not have ever been shown how, or she may have abandoned that strategy for some reason. So even though students may score well with the sub-skills, that doesn't mean there's not an issue that needs to be addressed in the decoding and the encoding side. And those will determine by looking at her errors and looking what she does, at her behavior as she reads and as she spells. The next test was the auditory processing test. And this one I didn't have to ask her to make errors for. She actually had some challenges here. And even ones that she did get correct, they were slow. You can watch her actively trying to visualize the words and process them. And you didn't see her because she was off the camera, but she was looking at me saying, I don't know how to do it. I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. So although her score of 8 out of 10 is technically good on this interpretation, I have definite concerns in this area and a goal to train her to manipulate sounds more automatically. She needs this for fluency, which is rate and accuracy. And I've seen some inaccurate reading coming from her. And she needs it for managing the overlap in the code that we discussed last time, where you have sound pictures like OW that can represent 2 different sounds. And when you're attacking a new word, you're going to have to try out both and see which one makes the most sense. And in order to try them both, you have to manipulate sounds, which is this test. And the last subtest I gave her was the code knowledge test. So remember, she was looking at a cue card and I was recording on this sheet as she did it. I saw some letter naming maybe, and just a whole lot of uncertainty and a score that is poor for someone her age. And even for someone younger, it's a poor score. This is clearly contributing to the global reading tendencies I've seen from Samantha and from her spelling challenges that she's had, for a long time now. She needs better management of the variation in our code, how each sound can be represented in lots of ways, and she needs a way to sort that out for herself. And so the variation and the overlap I mentioned are in chapter 5. So that's where we should see things get much more interesting. And in the the multisyllable management chapter in chapter 6 for Samantha. And generally, although she can segment, she's not picking these up. That means she needs to be trained to attend to the sound pictures within words. So those are my goals for Samantha. And I thought maybe we'd take a second here to see if anybody has any questions from last time. So let me change. Here we go. So I thought I'd just open up for a few minutes in case you have questions about the test. I asked you all to do the test with your own children. So maybe you have questions about whether you were doing it right or questions about the scoring.
You can unmute yourself and just throw your question out there.
How many of you got a chance to do it? To show me with a show of hands. Good.
I have been trying to do some of these things with a student of mine, and I'm wondering if there is like a lesson plan that I should be doing.
Well, as we go through the book, I'll show you what that lesson plan will be. So today, once we look at chapter 3, you can see that we develop a lesson plan from there.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I have a question. I did both of the tests with my children,
Mhm,
and both of them struggled with the auditory processing the most.
mhm,
And they were both speech delayed, and my son, he's in third grade. He and my daughter is 6. So, but they both had the speech delay, and my son was diagnosed with dyslexia as well.
mhm,
But he's had a lot of remediation, so they were both strong in the other portions of the test.
mhm.
Um, so I'm just curious, like with the auditory processing, like what should I kind of be looking for the most, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So it's quite common for students who have had other instruction to still have auditory processing challenges. And so we'll definitely want to focus on those lessons that teach that. And in chapter 3, when we get to the lessons, we actually have an auditory processing lesson focused right on that skill. And then as we go forward, you'll see in the goals section of each of the lessons that we'll learn, some of them mark that they're for auditory processing. So those would be the ones that you would want to focus on the most, to make sure you include a lot of repetition for.
Hi, Erin.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this too. I love it.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad. This is such a fun
Yeah,
thing
a
to do.
quick question about the code knowledge test.
Mhm.
There are several different sounds that like OO could say.
Mhm,
And when I gave the student the test, we went through, and when he got to the second one, the C, he
Mhm.
said, "K." Then he looked at me and said, "Do you want the soft sound too?"
mhm,
And I said, "Yeah, if you know the soft sound, give me whatever sounds that you know."
mhm.
So he did, like, he gave me the hard and soft G sound, all the Y sounds, okay, all of that. So I just circled correct whatever one that he said. So like for
Mhm,
TH, he said the soft, for this, so I circled that one. But
mhm.
when you go to evaluate it, interpret the scores,
Mhm.
you're just counting it one time?
Yes.
Like okay, so as long as they said one sound, then that counted as correct.
That's correct. And
Okay.
then you know something very important about him. He knows that those sound pictures can represent different sounds, right?
Yes, yeah.
So then you want to make sure he knows how to manage that. So when we
Okay,
get to
right.
chapter 5, he already understands that there's overlap, but you want to make sure he knows all the management
Right.
processes that good
He's
scholars
he's one of my third graders, and he only missed 3
do. Oh, wow.
on that code knowledge test. But it was cute because on the EW
Mhm.
sound, ooh, he sat there for a couple seconds, then he looked at me and said, "I'm trying to see it in my head as a word."
Mhm.
And
Very good.
he couldn't get it. And I'm like, "Honey, it's fine. Let's just go to the next one."
Right.
But then when I showed him at the end, because I explained to him that I was just kind of using him to help me in a class that I'm taking, this sort of thing.
Mhm.
So he was kind of excited to be helping me. So
Mhm.
when I showed him it and showed him few and new, he's like, "Oh, I should have had that picture in my head."
Mhm.
So for him, he really needed a word
Right.
to
And
come with the sound.
I think we all do. I mean, if you think of,
Mhm.
we don't know these off the top of our heads unless we're
Yeah,
working with them all the time.
exactly.
It's about being able to pull this information out of known words to use for unknown words. So he can do that too, which is really cool, right?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that you can see what we're ideally trying to get students to be able to do.
Right. Yeah.
And
Now,
I don't expect a student to know 100% of that code. I don't want him
right.
sitting around memorizing it. I want him pulling it actively out of his memory bank, his word bank, right?
Okay. Okay. Now I have a first grader, 5th month. So
Mhm.
September-ish. She's in my classroom as well. And so I gave her all of these different tests as well. I'm a Montessori teacher, so I have first, second, and third. So I wanted to do a first grader and a third grader to see like how they we're different and
Mhm.
what we're working on and to see the skills. But so she did pretty well in terms of what we've explicitly taught already.
Mhm.
And the things that she hasn't worked on, she just immediately started, in terms of the code knowledge test. She did fantastic on which one? Blending. The blending one, she got them all right. So that was good. Auditory processing, she struggles with, and I knew that, but I just thought it was fun doing it with a younger student and then also with one of my older students as well.
Yeah. It's
So,
neat to see the differences.
yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Does anybody else have any questions about the test? Okay, great. Well, then why don't we just keep going? I wanted to take this discussion time too to think about the assignments that I gave you last week. So I asked you to read a section of the Reading Reflex book that was about helping you slow yourself down enough to really notice all the things you're doing as you read. So that's the little excerpt that they had made that had the word gallimaufry in it. Do you remember that?
Mhm.
I love that illustration. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? No?
What?
Okay.
What can I ask real quick? What page is that on?
I'm trying to remember.
Looking
Let me get my
for-
book real fast.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
It's
think
okay.
it was
I'll
like,
Because I did do something, but, oh, here it is. I found it.
it's on
18.
page 18. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we read something like that, we can really see, it slows us down enough so we can see some of the little things we're doing subconsciously and quickly.
Right. Like the gallimaufry.
Mhm.
I tried it as gallimaufry. So I did the I and E, but then I still didn't know what that word was. So I didn't know which way really to pronounce it. I did it both
Right.
ways in my head, but
So yet again, where our oral language is going to affect our ability to decode, right? The number of words we know is going to limit the words
our
we can decode.
vocabulary.
Yeah. We'll have a guess on what it is pronounced as, and we can pull its meaning. We'll begin to learn this word from written text, but it'll take some exposures, and it will take at some point either looking it up or asking someone how you pronounce it, right? But that's how we all learn new words, from books. I had a lot of words I learned from books. I remember my mother was appalled when I told her that I had been reading about a vineyard. And she said, no, that's a vineyard. Well, yeah, so that one's a fun one. And then the other two assignments I gave you was to set up your spaces so that you can work with your children, given the things that they're recommending in the book. So if anybody has any challenges there, let me know. And then there was a section of the chapter that we didn't get to look at really closely because we ran out of time and I had to move fast to get to demonstrating the test. And so that was the section of the chapter where they had a lot of like a parental concern and a response to that. So if anybody has any questions about that, let me know. We can talk about it now, or we can talk about it at the end too. We'll have discussion time. But unless anybody stops me, I'm going to hop on and keep going. Oh, it looks like you have a question, but you're muted. Let me see if I can get your name. Brenda, were you trying to talk?
There we go. Yeah.
Oh, there. Yeah.
There. I tutor virtually. So do you have any special tips or recommendations for that?
No, I think you'll find the lessons lend themselves very nicely to doing virtually. You can use usually there's a virtual whiteboard that you can write on and
Right.
point to sound pictures as you do it. The important thing will be that you've got sound pictures somehow that you're pointing to and calling by sound, not by letter names.
Right. Okay.
And
So
then you can do a lot of like sharing, sending sending copies of sheets maybe set up already for them to write on and that
Well,
kind
and I have a document camera that I can put your sheets under.
of.
So I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything.
No, I don't think so. Yeah,
Okay.
I think you'll be good with that.
All right.
The challenge I found on working online is just getting the students mapping out sound pictures and saying the sounds as they do it enough, because we tend to want to use the typewriter, right?
Yes.
And they do too.
Right.
But so it's good to have them pull out a sheet of paper, direct them, and have them writing too, or a
Well,
whiteboard.
Right. What I did with your sheet that has the blank boxes in it, I
Mhm.
took and drew a dot in each one before I sent it to him and just had him put his finger on the dots as we were sounding out before we put the sound picture there.
Nice. Yeah, very good. Yeah, all
So-
these ways that we can get them to be really tactile and thinking about the position of words rather than the timing. I mean, the position of sounds rather than the timing of sounds will be good.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Brenda. Anybody else? All right. Well, then what I think I'll do is just hop ahead with the presentation that we've got for today. And then we'll have discussion at the end, as I said. So let me play this. There we go. So if we think about the very end of chapter 3, they had some sections for us to think about. And they said one of the main parental concerns is, well, will you understand the lesson plans? And what if I don't? And I think that's less of a concern for us because we're going to be going through those together. I'm going to be showing them to you. We can make sure you understand the lesson plans. But I did want to point out on that page, there's a nice discussion of the lesson plan structures, so for each of the lessons, they're set up the same. There's a readiness section that you need to check as a guide as to whether or not you want to do that with your child. Some older students are going to skip certain things. Some aren't appropriate for younger students. So just check that area real fast. And there's a goals section in there. And they recommend that you use that as a reminder for yourself throughout the lesson, what you're doing. So you can really focus on what it is you want to accomplish with that lesson and not get sidetracked by things that aren't really that important, right? The materials are listed there. That's so you can get everything ready ahead of time. You don't want to be doing it when the student sits down. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of the main ones is you want to have control over the lesson, right? And if you're busy gathering things, you're not attending to the student, and so you're going to have trouble, doing that. Plus, if you have everything ready, well, then you can spend more time with your student. You can get a lot more done, and you're not busy cutting things out at that time, for example. There's also a presentation section. It gives you some suggested language, and in the book, they point out, don't think of this as scripting. Don't try to memorize the wording and say it exactly as it is there. Use your own words. It's going to be more natural for you and more natural for your student, for your child. Just be careful not to change the intent. So if it's asking about what sounds you're hearing, make sure you don't turn it into what letters are you seeing, for example. That would be something that would completely undermine the intent of the lesson. And then at the end of each one of them is a correcting problems section, which is probably the most important part of the lesson plan. This helps you capitalize on each of those teachable moments. When the student makes an error, you've got a chance to teach some information or guide the use of a skill. So really pay close attention to those. There's a gold mine of information there. All right. The other sort of general guide about the lessons before we hop into each one. So for the book, they define a new reader as someone who's first grade, 6 months or younger, around that age. In the UK, I guess that's year 2. And they say with those new readers, you want to do the lessons that have the little sound doggy picture up in the corner somewhere. So there'll be a nice guide for you, make it easy for you to pick your lessons. Any students who are older than that, with some knowledge already, they're just going to start at the very beginning of chapter 3, and you're going to make your way through all the lessons, but you'll check the readiness section to make sure it's not one that older students might be able to skip or something. Okay. So let's hop into chapter 3. Let's see here. Yep, there it is. I just want to make sure I hadn't skipped something. And this is where we'll teach what's called the basic code. So by the basic code, we mean the most common sounds and those ones that are represented by only one letter at a time. So this is words at their simplest. And we're even going to start in chapter 3 with words that are just a simple little syllable, a consonant and a vowel and a consonant. So they can't get much easier than that. And then we'll work our way up from there, getting everything more complicated as we go. Now, the lessons in chapter 3 have a lot of goals that we want to accomplish. And so there's a good section. You should really read these closely, I think. But let's go through them very quickly together. The first goal is that they understand that letters are pictures of sounds. Okay. And many children fail to truly understand this. What they're supposed to be doing is each time they see a symbol, they're supposed to say the sound that it represents. And then we make our way through the word. And when we get to the end, we have meaning if we've been doing things right. But it's funny how many kids get off track from this and are really trying to read with many other ways, many other compensatory mechanisms, mostly guessing, anticipating, picture, walking, talking with you ahead of time to find out what everything they can about the subject so they can guess better, things like that. We have to walk very carefully in how we talk about sounds and letters to be sure that we don't derail them and get them off track there. So in the chapter, they talk about some of the things you want to avoid when you're talking about letters and sounds. Very simple things that subtly put children off on another tack, away from a sound to print approach. So one thing we want to avoid is things like, what does that say? And they talk about why. That's not how we want to talk about it. And they say instead, you want to say something like, do you remember what to say when we see that? Do you see how much more accurate that is about sounds and letters and what we're supposed to do with them, right? It avoids your child coming to think that there's some sort of trick that he doesn't understand for figuring out what sound a letter makes, right? It's very clear here that it's just you have to remember what to say, and if you don't, then we'll go from there, right? Now, we also want to avoid ever using letter names to refer to the symbols. So we don't want to say things like, what sound does M make, right? And this brings us back to the discussion we had about learning sounds and symbols being these paired associates that are difficult enough to learn. We don't want to add anything more to disrupt the process. So instead of saying, what sound does M make, just point to it and say, what sound does that represent, right? We're just working very carefully to be accurate, okay? And the reasoning here is that, of course, we don't want to confuse students, but also letter name interference is more of a profound problem than you might think in decoding. Cueing off the letter name causes a lot of confusion and error and slows them way down too. If their first response to a symbol is its letter name when they're sounding out the word is going to be inefficient because they have to take those steps to get to the symbol right, from that letter name. And it's prone to error because they might not do it every time. So I've seen kids trying to sound out and they're mixing letter names and sounds as they go. They're never going to be successful at the end. Right? So you can see in the pretest, sometimes when students have these letter names as their first response to print, you'll see them responding, even though you said, what sound would you say for this? They'll give you letter names and they'll do it again and again, right? But another thing you'll see is if you look closely at the errors, you can actually tell that they're doing that cueing, even if they don't tell you out loud. So you might point to this one and they'll tell you that the sound is s, and you think, oh, that's fine. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's one of the options, right? But then they get to this one. I've had students tell me that's eh, because the letter C starts with s and the letter M starts with E, right? The name of the letter does. And I've had students tell me this is dub or d because of W, right? So you're going to get errors happening along the way. Cueing from the letter name, even though it's supposed to be helpful, really isn't. It causes more problems than we realize. So there's an excellent discussion of why we teach the sounds and work with just those and not the letter names on page 54 and 55. So teachers, you might want to take note of that section because there's a great exercise to illustrate this to your colleagues, right? Because there are many, many kindergarten teachers, especially, who really want to start with the letter names and then go from there. And they're really wedded to it. So you could maybe try that illustration. It's fun. All right, our second goal with these lessons that we're going to see today are that your child knows the correspondence between all the sounds and the sound pictures that make up the basic code. Okay, that's just an expectation that we're going to have, before we go on. And expect young children to take time to learn these. It's just going to take time. If they're under 6, they may lack the left to right orientation that you need for distinguishing like a B and a D, for example. And similar sounds like I, eh, are going to take some time. They take longer to learn. That's all. It's very simple. We just need to take the time that we need on it. But importantly, we're going to be teaching these within words, not in isolation. Because recall that paired associate learning that we discussed last time is made easier when relevance or meaning is a part of it. So learning these within words is going to provide that. Okay. And we're going to avoid referring to the basic code vowel sounds as things like short vowels or short sounds. That's a category, that we use in our minds, but kids don't have that yet. And we're going to avoid that terminology because it's very confusing. We'll just talk about them as I and aw and ah, right? And we're going to avoid using keywords. So for example, we would want to avoid something like them seeing the letter A and saying a apple, ah. Right? This adds more steps and more to remember. And we don't want kids to start to think that the first sound is the only important one. You'd be amazed at how many kids show up in the clinic, especially especially first graders, year 2 in the UK. Their strategy is to read the first sound and then guess the rest. And it takes a lot of retraining to get that strategy out of them. Okay. Older students are going to take some time to learn these too sometimes. They have bad habits that need to be replaced. So that can take a little time. So don't rush through the lessons. If the student's making errors, then it's worth doing more of it. It often takes longer to replace bad habits than to build new ones to start with. So with the older kids especially, it's going to be really important when they stumble to immediately ask, what sound is that? and give the sound if they don't know it, even though they should know it. Don't say they should know it. They missed out on that somehow. You're there, you're going to provide it. What sound is that? If they don't know, tell them what sound it is. That's going to interfere with their attempts to use the wrong information to figure out the word. Okay. Our third goal is that they understand that, wow, spoken words are made of sounds. You know, this is a revelation to some people, especially really little ones, right? But written language is merely a visual representation of spoken language. So we want to do some things to encourage intimacy with that oral language. Sound games that they have everywhere are good for doing that. But keep in mind that it is what your child hears, not what she sees, that you're interested in. You want to make sure they understand that and you remember that. When we're working on sound games, right? It's what you're hearing. And older students may not be willing to play sound games, and that's okay. There are other lessons we can use to correct their problems, okay? So we won't worry about that if they don't want to play those. But I wanted to point out that in the book, they say they've never had a client that could not be taught to hear isolated sounds. And I haven't either. That includes clients with hearing aids and implants. There was no client who could not be taught to isolate sounds. Remember, language is hardwired. Sounds are a part of that intimate language knowledge. So the linguist in me is very happy to hear this coming from a reading methodology. Yes, some kids are going to need to be able to, or going to need to be taught to access that knowledge that's in them. And it might take some teaching, but it's there. There's nobody who can't do it. Okay. So keep that in mind as you work. Our fourth goal is that they understand that written words are made of the sound pictures that represent the sounds in words. Okay. We're going to impart this just through our lessons as we're working. This is going to be one of the things they understand. Right? And the good thing is children have some really natural abilities that we can capitalize on for them to get this. One thing is kids are all very good at getting what they need, right? And they all know that they need to read. Some of your kids are going to walk in the door and they're not going to want to do the work, right? They've been sort of beaten down in the process and they don't want to be there. But that they still know that they need it, right? They know they need to read at some point. Another of the natural skills that kids have is labeling. They are amazing at this. By age 5, they've learned 5,000 to 10,000 words. This is going to help your student, your child, to learn the sounds for each of the sound pictures, just as labels of things, right? And they're also great at sorting or categorizing, okay? Young children have a remarkable capacity for this. Even newborns are sorting faces already from birth, sorting faces into different categories, you know, low, known, beloved, strangers, that sort of thing. And this is going to assist your child in noticing the attributes of sounds and sound pictures, if we can get all the other stuff out of the way. And we're sure to introduce them to and work with the entire code, okay? Not just the sounds that are shown with one letter like they do in phonics, and then teach the rest through rules and other things. We're going to present them to the entire code so that they have a chance to do what they do with the one sound, one letter combinations. Our fifth goal, I think there's only 7, so we're almost there where we can start getting to lessons. Our fifth goal is that she understands that sound pictures are written in oh no, the sound pictures in written words, sorry, it's covered up for me here a little bit. The sound pictures and written words occur in a sequence from left to right. That's in English, it's just arbitrary. Other languages go right to left. Some go up and down. I even remember, I can't remember which language it is, but I know there's one where you write one line left to right, and then the next line you go right to left, and you go back and forth like that as you go. It's just an arbitrary thing, and they have to get that directional orientation. And that takes time to establish, especially for little ones, right? It's completely normal for young children to reverse letters, left and right, or even up and down. You'll see the left to right reversing of letters up to like 7 or even 8 years old. And that's not anything we shouldn't expect. It's very normal. Beyond that age, yeah, you might be dealing with a visual processing issue, right? If you're still seeing reversals after age 8. But the lessons in the book are one of the main prescriptions for that issue anyway. Okay, reading in this way with these orientation things that we're going to be doing. So no matter what you've got going on, you're going to be addressing them. And realize that directional orientation is just going to take some time. You'll find some great ideas for that. For orienting your child to the directions that they need to use to read. You'll find some great ideas for that on page 60. And just keep in mind that even your very low visual students are going to sort this out, but that they have to sort out the rest first, the rest of the code, right? If they are lost with the rest, then they're never going to get to pinning this part down, right? So focus on the rest, and then this will come in its natural time for that child, right? All right, our 6th goal, that they're able to segment sounds in spoken words. And we can't underestimate the importance of this one. Segmenting is the highest correlator to reading success. It correlates even to oral and reading comprehension. So we want to be sure that students are segmenting really well. And there are children out there who have started reading sort of spontaneously. But children who learn to read without establishing good segmenting are at a much greater risk of having trouble with longer words and having trouble comprehending later. So we want to be sure we've got that in place for them. Be diligent in making sure that their segmenting is clear. Okay. No leaving sounds together. No gul. It's going to be g and u. Right? And make sure each sound stands alone, no sloppy added to it. So we're not going to say ba, for example. We're going to cut that off and just make it b. And at this point, we should be thinking about segmenting for ourselves too. Let's not assume, we shouldn't assume that we're all able to segment with ease already. Many of you have never been taught how to do this. And many of you are teachers who have been actively trained to leave certain sounds together. Things like or, for example, and are, you've been trained to think of as a single sound. Linguists will tell you they're not a single sound. There are 2 sounds, 2 phonemes involved there. So it'll take you a little time to acquire segmenting too. You can be learning it along with the kids. It starts out pretty easy in chapter 2, being able to segment just those simple words, and then you'll build it up from there. And you have a lot of clues. The materials all show us often a word, and it'll put the sounds together for you to show you what sounds are supposed to be there. So that'll be a nice clue to you that, oh, I'm supposed to hear 3 sounds in that, aren't I? So, and I'm here to help too. You can always call on me. You can contact me outside of the lessons, via email, and we can talk on the phone or something. We can work on segmenting if you really need some help. But for next time, I'm going to give you an assignment, which is to practice segmenting. And you can use the activity that's on page 62 and 63. And in it, it gives you a bunch of words that look like this. And then to the right, it shows you, a little cue to what the sounds maybe should be. So this one is supposed to be ow and s. So that'll be your assignment. Sit with that and see if you can hear the three sounds that they are expecting you to isolate there. All right, so this brings us to our last goal with these lessons, that they are able to blend the sounds in words too. This can be a very difficult task for children to learn and to perform, especially little ones. And the first step is understanding what happens when sounds occur in a sequence, is understanding it. So I recall in my own training, the author of Reading Reflex, Carmen McGinnis, saying something so very freeing to me about learning to blend. She said, don't assume that they can't do it. Assume that they don't get it. That it's an issue of understanding, not really ability. That they really don't understand what you want of them or what is expected of them. And the best way for them to understand it is really by example from you. It's too hard to explain it. The language you have to use to explain it is just too confusing to kids. You can't say push the sounds together. Well, they're not anything physical that you can push, right? Say them fast. Well, then they're not really fast. They're blended together, right? The language just gets too confusing. But if we do a bunch of examples and show them what we mean, we can impart what it is that they need to be doing. The basic structure is we're going to be saying a word, saying its segmented sounds in sequence, and then saying the word again so they can hear the connection between the blended word and the isolated sounds. So for example, I would just, if we were working with cat and I was showing them an example of how it works, I would say, well, let's listen to the sounds of cat. At, cat. And we do a lot of that going back and forth, and they'll begin to understand what is expected them of blending. It takes a little while, and children just learning will often have trouble remembering all the sounds. So a very common thing they'll do is blend the last two sounds and leave off the first because it happened so long ago. So they're trying to read the word cat and they sound out at and tell you the word is at. It's a pretty common thing to do. So one thing that we'll be doing for kids who are doing this type of blending is teach them to blend the first two sounds and then add on the third. So for example, if they're reading the word cat and they sound out k, ah, we'd have them blend that into ca before they sound out t. And then they're going to blend ca and t into cat, which is a lot easier to do. It really reduces the memory load. And I'll be showing you how to do this. I'm just pointing out this is one of our goals right now. And pointing out the good readers do this sort of subconsciously, and they do it very quickly. So it's interesting when kids aren't able to do it. It really makes us reflect on it. Another thing you'll see for kids who are having trouble with this is they'll say all the sounds and then just guess a similar word. They really don't know what the connection is between the sounds and the blended word. And so again, doing it by example is going to help a bunch, and also teaching them to blend the sounds together as they go through the word will help them. And the error correction sections of each of the lessons will give you some really good tips on how to help a student to understand blending better. The final thing about this goal is that you also want to be sure that you really acknowledge to kids that this is what reading is. That you give them lots of praise for sounding out a word and then blending the sounds together to get meaning at the end. make sure they understand that this is indeed what reading is. In time, your child will be doing this fluently, but for now, they need to practice a lot, taking the time and care to do it correctly. And it feels so slow and awkward to them and to you sometimes, especially as a parent, if you haven't seen a lot of kids learning to read. So you and they need to understand that adults read quickly only because they took the time to practice slowly as kids. Okay. All right, enough prep. Let's get to the lessons. And my little sample student has arrived, so that's good. She's gonna have to be patient for just a few more minutes though. So remember, I wanted to back up. Remember that new readers do the lessons that are marked with the sound doggy on them. And older readers are going to do all the lessons unless the readiness section indicates that they can skip it and you think that they can skip it too. And remember one other general thing about the lessons. You can and you should be doing more than one lesson in a sitting. Okay. All right. And importantly, repetition is the key, right? Young children are going to need a lot of repetition to learn the materials. And older children need lots of repetition in order to break old habits. Okay. So even when you move on to new lessons, keep practicing previous lessons until your child's performing with fairly consistent accuracy. Okay. The first two lessons in the book are little sound games. So in the goals, we were talking about sound games. These are casual and fun little games to encourage a very young child to be thinking about sounds and words. But I have a little secret. The publisher really pushed the authors of Reading Reflex to include these two. They're fine activities, and there's no reason not to do them with your child if your child can benefit from them, but feel free to skip them. Okay. And I wanted to point out that after the publication of Reading Reflex, the authors came out with a much better lesson, I think, to do as a first introduction to sounds within words. So you'll find that if you find you really need it, if you've got some really young students, right, or students struggling significantly with blending or with special learning needs, then this might be a very nice way that you could introduce that to the student before you begin doing the word building lessons. So you'll find it at the store. Last time I showed you how you could get to the store, and it's called Airless Directed Reading. Okay, and it's in a downloadable PDF, so it's cheap. You can print it out and cut it up and do the lesson. It's got instructions on what to do. It's pretty simple. I thought I might show it to you, though, since I've got a student here, and you could see that this could be how you could present the whole idea that our words are made of sounds and that the letters are related to that and how they're related. So let me stop sharing real quickly. And come back to you here and change my video. There we go. So you should be able to see what I'm doing with my student. And but first, let me show you Samantha again. She can say hi. So thanks for coming in again, Sam, to help demonstrate things. So this I probably wouldn't be doing with someone her age, right? But she's here so she can play the part of a student for us, which is great. And the materials for this Airless Directed Reading look like this. They have little cards. And you basically invite the child to listen to pig. There's little sounds in there. Let's listen to it. You want to repeat with me? Good. Pig. Did you hear the sounds when I said them?
Yeah.
Great. So let's listen to book now. Book. Book. Did you hear book happen? And you can just keep going. The whole idea is just for her to hear the sounds, see that the letters are connected. You're not trying to teach her the sound pictures or anything. You're just exposing her to them and the idea that words are made of sounds. So let's listen to dog. D, G, dog. And we even, as you can see, get into things that are more than one letter, like the sh in fish. And we'll see different ways to show the same sound in there. So those are things that you could certainly talk about, although my students are the ones that usually point them out. And that's a great warm-up activity or a way just to introduce the idea. The student just pipes in with you. So it's not like they're going to be making any mistakes or worried that they're doing it right, because all they have to do is repeat with you. Okay. So with that, sorry, I got to remember what to do here. I'm going to share my screen one more time. And we'll come back to here. So the first lesson for many of your kids, your older kids, right, are going to be the 3 sound word buildings, okay? Everybody's going to start here, even your older students, but you can certainly with older children talk about how we're going to start with very simple words just to get comfortable with the process, okay? And the materials section will tell you what you need to gather and prep ahead of time. So I have already cut up my word puzzles for the Fat Cat Sat list that I was going to show you today and put them in envelopes, right? So they're all ready for us to go. And the lesson steps are all written out in the presentation section. So don't feel like you need to record all of that and make notes on all of that. Just relax and see how it looks. I'd like for you to have a picture of the lessons as you try to do them later. So let me get back to you again here and let me share what Samantha and I are doing for this first lesson. So I would put this out when I've got one. If you don't have a handy dandy board, you could just write those on those numbers on a piece of paper, right? And you could say, okay, we are going to build some words.
Okay.
Let's start with the word cat.
Okay.
Cat is 3 sounds. So listen carefully. What do you hear here in cat? Great. And do you happen to know which one is great? You got it. If she didn't, I would point to it. She would bring it down. What do you hear here?
Ah.
Cat. You hear ah. Okay. And don't let them rush you. Finish your directions. Okay. They'll begin to go at your pace. What do you hear here? Cat. Great. And let's read that.
Cat.
Cat. Great. I know these are still for you, Samantha, but we are going to work up into harder words and we're still going to use the same process. So let's get used to the process. Okay. So let me give you a piece of paper. That's how we're going to build a word, right? And I also want you to practice writing out some words. So let's put that there. I think they can see there. Yeah. And right up here. So I want you to map out cat. I want you to say the sound as you write it. The whole time. Oh, no, start again. I want you to trace over it and say the sound. The important thing is the sounds. Okay. That's what we're practicing. Cat. Beautiful job. And if she were a very young student, I might have to direct her on how to form these letters and things like that. But for now, I would just keep going. Great, you built cat. Let's put that to the side. You can put this down. And let's build another one. Let's build fat. This was written a while ago. We have updated the certification materials and we've changed some of the pictures, but what's the first sound you hear in fat?
Oh.
Great. Do you know which one it is? Good.
Ah.
Mhm.
T.
Let's read it.
Fat.
Good.
At. Fat.
Great. And now you can map it out on the paper. Let's hear those sounds as you do it. Good. Now, I know
Fat.
you and I have worked at the multisyllable level. It's been a while, and at that point I was letting you run your sounds together, right?
At.
But at this point, we should say each sound all by itself.
At.
Good. So try writing it that way. Try saying all by itself and then stopping before you do at.
At.
You've got it.
Fat.
That's what we want. That's what you'll want your children to be doing at this stage. Beautiful. And we would just keep going. And with Samantha's attention and many kids' attention span, we could do all 8, right? Wouldn't be that difficult to go through those real quickly, right? Many of them want to, and the little ones love it. You know, they'll ask to finish. So let me see what I wanted to tell you about that once we were done with this. So I wanted to share my screen again. And in here. So moving forward from here, after you've built all those little words, right? You would just do the next lesson in the chapter using the fat cat sat word lists that will be with the lessons, and repeating that same lesson with that same list until your child shows about 80% accuracy with the sound symbol correspondences. Once that's happening, then you can move on to the bug on jug list that's in the chapter and repeat those same lessons with the new list that has more sound pictures to expose them to and for them to learn. And then finally, you'll do the bin bun list, and that'll add 8 more sound pictures. So by the end of those 3 word lists, they'll have been exposed to the entire basic code. Okay. And I wanted to point out something about record keeping. I have been a clinician for a long time, and I also go into classrooms, and I can't remember what happened if I don't record it. So I wanted to just show you real quickly what I do when I'm recording things. I just do a very simple little list. I don't know if you could see that. So I just write down, you know, like when I'm meeting with the student, I have my plan in place. Oops, my plan's over here. My plan's in place, right? Of what I hope to accomplish in that day. And then when I meet with them, I write down the, you know, the name of the lesson that I did and how it went. You know, if it went great, and then I might say move on next time for myself, or I might say do one more time, do this list another time after that activity. Okay. Oops. So I wanted to give you an assignment for next time, which is to cut up your puzzles and organize them in your envelopes, like I have mine, and in your shoebox, so that you can do those lessons. Focus on the fat cat sat list and cut up everything you need for the lessons, right? And have them ready to go. And I did want to point out at this point that we also have some parent support workbooks that go along with the lessons and the lists. So there's a fat cat sat set, there's a bug on jug set, and a bin bun set. You'll find all 3 of those in the basic code workbooks. There's a reading one, so you can do some extra reading practices that would go along with what you're doing. It would be great for a teacher who wants to have somebody else partnering on the instruction. Maybe she has an aide who comes in. She could hand the book to the aides to do some extra time, or send it home to the parents to do the parent support at home. And it'll help train the parents a little bit to see what we're doing, what the approach is. And then there's a handwriting set too that goes with, that you can get in these. And that provides some letter formation and handwriting practice in the same sequence of your lessons. So when we introduce the 8 sound pictures we use in the Fat Cat set list, then those are the 8 that they learn to form and they practice handwriting for. Okay. All right, the next lesson is the auditory processing lesson. Now I know a lot of teachers think this one is maybe too complicated. Or parents are a little afraid of it because they're not quite sure they get it. Please don't think it's too hard for your child. The clear language and the directions you give, and the carefully chosen words you use and your finger and how you direct everything is going to make it accessible. And this one is absolutely critical for students with any sound processing challenges. So again, we're going to use the Fat Cat Sat list, and we're going to move on from there as they're showing readiness for it. So let me share the place where I'm working with a student again. And I would just say, all right, we are going to practice changing sounds and words.
Okay.
And with little ones, you don't need to say anything more. With Samantha, I might point out, do you remember that part of the test where I asked you to drop sounds out of words?
Mhm.
And you told me it was a little hard, right?
Task.
No, don't worry about these
Oh,
right now.
okay.
But do you remember telling me
Yeah.
how it was a little hard? Well, this is the first step
Okay.
on learning how to do that. Okay. And then we'll work up into that, into making that much easier. So I make sure I'm putting this where you can see them. So we have all the sound pictures up here that we're working with, that we worked with in the word building. And we'll start with this little list. The student doesn't see the list. This is what I'm looking at. And I'd say, okay, let's build caught. What's the first sound you hear in caught? Good, keep going.
Off.
Mhm.
Caught.
Beautiful. Let's read what you wrote.
Pot. Caught.
Now, if this is caught, change it to pot.
Pot. Pot.
Good. You got pot. Now let's change pot to pat. What's the new sound? I was telling the new sound.
At.
Pat. Good. Let's read that one.
Pat.
Mhm.
At. Pat.
Pat. You got it. Let's change pat to fat.
At. Fat.
Great. Fat to mat.
At. That.
Yes. That's mat. Let's make it cat.
At. Cat.
Good. And I would complete the whole list. You could see that she could certainly keep going. Her attention's there, right? We don't need to up the novelty yet. With very little ones, sometimes we maybe get one column done. And then I see that it might be time to change up activities and get their attention again, right? And that is the very beginning stages of the auditory processing. Some little ones really have a challenge there. They might have difficulty. Here, let me show you something typical they might do. If that's cap, show me cat. Bring that one and put it down there. Yeah, they'll hear that. They know
Cat.
they need that, right? But they aren't attending to what isn't there. And that's where my error corrections that are in the book, and you'll see that section, are very helpful. And I would tell her, great, we're going to need it. But you have something extra. This is capped, and we want cat. Can you hear what we don't need? You got it. Good. So there can be a lot of fruitful work that you can do there with this one. All right. Our next lesson, let me see what it is in the, maybe I can do it without showing you a slide on this one. The next lesson is sound bingo. I don't think you need to see the slide for that one. Sound bingo is pretty easy to implement. There are little bingo cards in the book that you cut up. And you give the child something to trace with. We're going to be tracing the sound pictures, not just covering them up. And we use the little cards from the lesson we just did, the auditory processing one. And we pull them up and call them by sound and see if she can recognize which one it is. Okay, it's p. Find a p on your board. You can trace over it. Say p as you do it. And I've got a p too. Good. Oh, you're supposed to trace over it.
I know I
Yeah.
did,
Oh, you did?
but you couldn't see the writing.
Oh, so you went over there. Yeah, I need darker pens. I'll get them for next time. And then you just keep going. Let's say I call out this one and she doesn't know what it looks like. You're not sure, Samantha? Let me show it to you. That's k. Okay. Now wait. That's what k looks like. Okay. Now go ahead and find it. And say it as you do it. Good. And I'll do mine. And we just keep going. See, so I did provide her with this information, but I asked her to hold on to it, right, before she used it. And that sound bingo, it's a fun one. Even the older students enjoy it. And it gives you a chance to work on letter formation if you're needing to do that too. Now we have, looks like three more lessons. Okay, so we're going to make it good. The next one is 3 sound directed reading. So for that, we need the fat cat sat word list all cut up. And we're just going to be reading the words. Okay. So I put one down. Now remember, I'm directing her to read it. So I want to be ready to point and to preempt any global reading tendencies she might have. So Sam, what sound is this?
Mop.
Great. She very well knows mop, right? But I'm showing her, I'm directing her through the process. All right, so let's do that same process.
At. Sat.
Beautiful.
App. Map. At. Cat. Op. Pop.
Good. Pretend you don't know that one. This sound. Yep, that's. Do you remember what to say for that one? It's aw.
Oh, okay.
So start that again.
Ought. Caught.
Good.
Cop. Cop.
Good job. Yeah, you remember that one. Yeah, great. So that's what we do when they don't know, right? Or say the wrong thing for that one.
Oh.
Oh, no, this is p.
Oh. Op. Cop.
You've got it. Great job. In the very last list, the bin bun list, you'll find some double letters. They're in bold and they're close together for you. And when you come across those, keep it simple. Say this is another way to show the sound old. Another picture of that sound. We're going to explain more later. That's helping us transition to that next chapter. Okay. Now I wanted to show you a variation you can do of that reading lesson. Because some kids, especially very young ones, aren't able to just say those sounds and blend them like Sam was, right? They need even more direction through the process. So what we're going to do is actually just tell her what the word is. She knows what the word is, that's off the table. And then it's just the process and blending the sounds again that she already knows the blended answer to. So Sam, let's read cop. Let's listen to the sounds as we do it.
Okay. Cop.
Yeah, I heard cop when you sounded it out. Good Good job. Let's listen to pop.
Okay. Sorry. Pop. Pop.
So by knowing what the answer is already, she knows what she's listening for. And we can do a whole lot of that until she's ready to blend cold. The next lesson you'll see in the chapter is spelling. 3-sound spelling practice. So for this, she's going to need a dry erase marker and an eraser. Or we could just do it on paper if we prefer. Here. I already pulled it out. We can use paper if you would prefer, but many of them like to change things up. All right, we're gonna spell the word cop. What's
Okay.
the first sound you hear in cop? Say the sounds.
Aw.
Let's read what you wrote.
Aw. Cop.
Let's check and see if you got that.
Yay.
Yeah, that's how to spell it. You've got it. Nice job. Let's spell
Wait.
map.
Can I erase it?
Yeah, go ahead and erase. And let's spell map.
Okay.
Let's hear those sounds. What do you hear first?
Ah.
Great. Let's read it.
App. Map.
Let's see.
Map.
Map. Someone's asking what page this lesson is on. Oh, someone else answered. Thank you. Great to have helpers. I appreciate it. That's 3-sound word spelling. And yes, it's on page 139. And I wanted to show you a couple of scaffolding things you can do for the kids who are a little unstable with the sound pictures. You can list what they're going to need at the top. Say, we're going to spell some words and they're here. It'll have these in them. And then you can ask them to map, and if they're not sure what the sound looks like, if they hesitate, then you just point to it and say, and show them. So for example, Sam don't know how to spell one of these, what the sound looks like. Let's spell map. What's the first sound you hear in map? Yep, that's good. Go ahead and write it out. Say it as you write it. What do you hear next in map? Map. What sound do you hear? What sound do you hear? Ah, that's right. Do you happen to know which one is ah? Oh, no, that one's all. Here's ah.
Oh, okay.
Or you could ask her to try again. But here, it makes it very easy. They're here for you to point to. Great. And what do you hear here in map? Beautiful. Now let's read it.
Map.
You've got it. So that's a nice scaffolding as they're learning these sound pictures and getting more comfortable with them. You can erase those if you want, Sam. And the other kind of scaffolding that I do sometimes for those who aren't automatic with segmenting to spell, right? They just want to try to remember the word and what it looks like and what the letters were. Many times what I'll do is ask that type of student to say the sounds of the word for me first. We segment it first, and then I ask them to write it. So I would say, Sam, we're going to spell mop. First, let's listen. What sounds do we hear in mop?
Mop.
No, one at a time.
Mop.
Great. Now map it out. Say those sounds that you hear. You don't have to do it on the numbers. You can do it underneath if you want.
Can you do it?
Sure. Let's hear it.
Mop.
Great. All right. So that's the spelling practice. And we've been doing this with all the fat cat sat lists in the book, working with the same 8 sounds. And when they're showing some proficiency with that, we're ready to move on to the next word list. But one other thing is on page 141 is where it talks about reading stories in the basic code. So there are some simple little stories in the book. In the readiness section, you can see it's perfectly fine to skip these with older students. They'd probably find these stories a little silly and babyish. But here, for example, is the fat cat sat little story. And the whole point is that we're trying to get them to use the same process, sounding out and blending, right? And they can begin to recognize words. That's fine too. All right, so let's read this.
Fat cat sat on mat.
Very nice. All together.
Fat
we have-
cat sat on mat.
Yeah, good.
Fat cat sat on map. Fat cat sat on mop. Fat cat sat on cup. Fat cat sat on pat.
Mhm. And you can see this student doesn't need to work with this, right? A younger one would be stopping to say sound, to figure out a sound, would have trouble blending, and I'd be helping her with it. So we certainly would skip that with older students, but you can see what you could do with the younger students. And at the end of the chapter, you'll see there are some stories that cover all the sounds of the basic code, like the fun in the sun stories in there. We won't read it, Sam, because I need to save time for other things, but you can see that you would do the same process with those. And I also wanted to let you know that these little stories, I have updated them from way back in the 90s and published them in a little decodable book. So with updated pictures, a little more natural language, so that you're not reading, for example, fat cat sat on mat. It's fat cat sat on a hat. And so you introduce them to a word or two, some difficult words here and there that can make a little more natural language. All right, thank you, Sam. I think
Am I done?
I'm done with you as my demonstration student. Thank you. And
You're
next time
welcome.
we'll do more.
Yeah, okay, bye.
Bye. And I had just a couple of wrap up things I wanted to do, and then we can open it up to questions.
Two.
So we went through those quickly. And so my assignment for you for next time is to take your child, whoever you've got, we talked about that last time, anybody you can do, even if you have to take someone to practice with who is just role playing a student for you. And take them through all the lessons in this chapter using the fat cat sat word lists like I did with Sam. And let's think about what you would do at this point once that's done, because it's going to be 2 weeks before I see you again. For new readers, you may have to repeat some of those lessons, like you might need to do the word building again or the auditory processing again, until they're doing fairly well with them. And then you can move on to the next word list. And when you're done with all 3 word lists, then it might be time to move on to chapter 4. In that chapter, you're going to have 2 consonant sounds next to each other, adjacent consonant sounds. And preschoolers may need to wait a little bit before you try to tackle that one, and just keep practicing with 3 sound reading and spelling. There's somewhat of a developmental challenge involved in the adjacent consonant sounds. And, when you decide you want to try it, give it a try and see what happens. And if blending is just way too hard, then wait another month or 2 with the young one and try it again. And on page 152, you'll see some great ideas for things you can do in the meantime with your child. If your child's older than 1st grade, 6th month, then you'll skip lessons as indicated in the readiness sections of the lessons, and you're going to keep moving forward as long as there's no errors or few errors, and just keep moving forward through the word lists until you're ready for chapter 4. And I imagine you'll be ready for chapter 4 before we meet again. Okay. And when we do meet again, we're going to go over chapter 4 and chapter 5. I'll show you the lessons there. And chapter 5 is where things are going to get very interesting. That's where we depart entirely from how phonics addresses such words. In chapters 3 and 4, everything's familiar. You've built words, you've read words, you've spelled words, you've done bingo and done things to learn the sound pictures. But in chapter 5, we're going to depart entirely from what's always been done. So teachers, be ready to shake things up from what you've done in the past. But parents, be assured, it's just a continuation of the way that we're working with the words in these first 2 chapters. We're not going to be doing anything different with them. We're still just going to be reading and spelling them and looking at their sound pictures. And children will be focusing on labeling them and sorting them and categorizing them. So before we meet next time, just to recap, practice segmenting using the activity on page 62 and 63. Cut up the puzzles for puzzles and word lists and things, then organize what you need for the Fat Cat Sat lessons and take your child through all of those lessons. And then either keep practicing them if needed or moving forward into the other word lists. Okay.
Okay, Erin, we have a couple questions. Let's see. All right. What is the blending? Sorry, can you clarify why sounds would be separated if on page 63 that blending the first 2 sounds helps reduce the memory load? So you would, yeah.
Yeah, so we want to learn the sound pictures, the sounds that correspond to each sound picture, right? The correspondence between those individual phonemes. So kids need to learn that, so we need to work with individual sounds. But they also need to learn to blend them together in order to read. And that's how we're going to teach them. The process is to sound one sound, sound another sound, blend that, sound another sound, blend that, sound another sound, and keep working through the word that way. It seems a little awkward to us because we do it so quickly. We don't even realize that we're doing that in our minds, but we're making it slow and explicit with the kid.
Have you ever heard of backwards chaining, the backwards sounding out? So in the word cat, you'd say, what does this say? And they'd say, t. What does this say? And they'd say, ah. Okay, let's put that together. At. Okay, let's put there.
I've seen all kinds of things to help kids try to blend together. You know, they do things like that, especially at the multi-syllable level, having kids starting at the end. In Phono-Graphix, I would never do that because we're modeling what they're going to be doing as they're decoding in a book. And good readers are not starting at the end and then working their way to the front. They're starting left to right. Their eyes are scanning smoothly. Their mind is processing the sounds smoothly as they go through. So we're modeling the real process, and we're not going to get, even though that might be helpful to help a kid understand or something, we're not going to go off that way because we always want to be modeling the correct process.
That's interesting. Okay.
That's how we get them reading quicker, right? And
That's
more
true.
efficiently than many other methodologies. We're not going to be teaching anything that we're going to unteach later.
What's the blending and segmenting assessment out of? Isn't that in the book?
Yeah. Was that
First
someone's
chapter?
question? Yeah, I think I glanced over and saw a few questions. I think some of them are indeed, answered earlier. So the blending and segmenting assessment is in the book. That was the pretest that we went through. And I'm sorry I wasn't showing you my slides and my lesson at the same time. It was hard to go back and forth. I'll figure that out for next time.
So the blending is on page 45.
Can I just ask that question?
Sure.
Oh, so my student didn't get past the blending, the first blending section. And then I just wanted to see for segmenting the segmenting one, we stopped at that one. So I didn't do the 2 boxes
Mhm.
of segmenting. And so I was a little confused. So with like pig on the blending, is that 3 points or like out of 3?
For blending or for segmenting?
Yeah,
Sorry.
for the blending test in that part 1.
So that's 1 point for the blended word. So you give him the sounds p, I, g, and if he can say pig, he gets 1 point.
Okay. And then for the segmenting one, when you go dog and they go d, g, is that then worth 3?
Yes, 1 point for
Okay.
each one. And if
Okay.
he says just d and doesn't get the rest, then he would get 1 point.
All right. Appreciate it. That was just my question.
Sure.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's see, I was wondering about the words a, is, and to in the stories. Did you introduce those as sight words?
So you're thinking about out of this book,
I think
the
so.
rewritten book? Yeah. So we do introduce a few little words that, or we introduce the sound picture that they need to know, the process that they need to know to read it. The book has a nice introductory section, and it tells you about how to manage those kinds of words in the story. So, and there's just a few in there, and they come across, them quite a bit, so they can learn them in context, and it allows for a lot more natural language, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
And those are available on the Phono-Graphics site, right?
Yeah,
In
they are
store
available
or
in the
something like
store.
that. Okay.
Mhm,
Cool.
Yep.
All right. Let's see. Any suggestions for assignments for student in grade 4 who can't blend 3 sounds?
Ooh, for assignments.
That's me
Okay.
again. So
Mhm.
the assignment that you're having us do,
Mhm.
he can't do that. So
Good.
when I do that sound of
Mhm.
pig,
Mhm.
like p, I, g, it
Mhm.
can't be sounded as pig.
Yeah, he doesn't get it.
No.
So
So is there kind of like
he's
a mini step? Oh,
And here's pig. Let's listen to the sounds of it. And he's pulling out the sounds, right?
mhm.
And then when you're done building it, you say, okay, we built pig, let's read it. And you're going back and saying the sounds and then saying the word. He's going to get a lot of examples of what reading is and how you listen
Okay.
to the word. So when you get to the page where you're supposed to do the reading of the word list, I would recommend continuing doing directed reading with him and say, all right, we're going to read the word pig again. So what are the sounds? Have him say each sound and listen for the word. And tell him, because he's old enough, right? Mature enough. I'd say the trick is to listen to the word forming as you sound it out. Listen for the word. You'll hear it happen. So let's practice doing that. And so just have him read the whole list where you've told him the word and then you listen for it forming. And you do a bunch of that. And then when you think he's about ready, then you can try having him just sound out and read, right?
Okay.
And when you have him sound out to read, have him remember, say these sounds, you'll have to listen for the word forming, okay? And you'll have to encourage him to put the sounds together as he goes so he doesn't lose them, right?
Okay.
So when he's done p and I, you could say, so far you have p, and then point to the next sound.
Okay. With all the letters in front of him or you?
Yeah,
Okay.
he's reading,
All right.
he's reading a card. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'd love to hear how it goes. Let us know, okay? Remind
Okay.
us that you have this student and we'll see how the
Okay.
lessons go.
Is that not a working memory issue where they're having trouble pulling all those sounds together?
Right. And that's what we're training. We're training them to be better with that.
Oh, okay.
My student, Mark, my dyslexic adult, had a horrible time with that, and he is getting better, but it's not great. I mean, it's that he is really challenged with that.
Yeah. Well, some of it is working memory and some of it is trying to use like working memory the wrong way, trying to use short-term memory rather than as you're sounding out, also at the same time, listening for words forming. Some of it is he doesn't get what he's supposed to be doing, right?
Mhm.
So I would really work with him on that concept that we sound out because we can hear it happen. We hear the word happen if we do it right. And he may not be thinking about the word as he goes. He may just be thinking about the letters, right?
Mhm.
And then when he gets to the end, then he starts trying to think about the word. But it's too late then. He'll lose stuff,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It's supposed to be happening as you're working. So let me give you an example of that. I'm going to say some sounds to all of you, but I'm going to stop before the end of the word and think about what you're doing when I stop. Everybody ready? P, r, I, n. T. You're all expecting something to happen next, aren't you? Like t
Mhm.
or s. Maybe you were thinking prince, right? But you're anticipating. You're searching in your oral vocabulary for something happening. And that's what we need to train them to do. And that's probably what your adult student, Donna, is not doing.
Mhm. Okay. All right. The workbooks are called what on your website? I'm looking for.
Oh, that person found it. But yeah, they're the sound to symbol basic
Oh,
code
okay.
workbooks you'll find there. And if you, those are just for the little ones, you know, who are learning the letter formation, or for a student, an older student who's really challenged and needs a ton of practice. Otherwise, I would wait in getting any workbooks for the chapter 5 and for the workbooks there for the older kids.
Okay. All right, that's it. That's all I see.
Great. Did that go too fast, all the lessons, or was it okay?
I thought it was great.
Yeah. Okay, good. And were you able to see everything? Because I can change the setup if I
No,
need to.
it went very well today. It was very clear. Everything was good, I think.
Beautiful. Great. Well, thank you all. And next time, it's 2 weeks. So you have a lot of time to practice this stuff and get set up. And I'll show you chapter 4 and chapter 5 next time. And someone else wrote, they said, for that 4th grade student or ones who need practice blending, you don't have to stay on the same word list. The danger of staying on the word list is they're going to get to memorizing them.
Right, right.
So I would say if they're having trouble blending, I would just keep going, working with different words each time, right? As long as they're recognizing enough of the sound pictures that it's not too frustrating.
Different vowels, correct?
Yeah, when you move from the fat cat sat list to the bug on jug list, you have 2 more vowels to work with. So there'll be 4 different vowels now.
Okay.
And then when you move to the next list, you have the rest. So you have
Good.
lots of things to work with.
All right, 2 weeks. We'll see.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
on
Enjoy.
May
Happy Valentine's Day. And
22nd. All right. Thank you, Erin. I'm going to
thank
shut
you,
the
everybody. We'll see you soon.
recording off.